post it in a format either in Slack, in Basecamp, right, so that you can get access to it. We're going to send a reminder on Slack and Basecamp about what the assignment is in case you missed it. And then all the notes are going to be posted there and shared there as well, so you can get access to anything that we missed, because I'll also do my best to capture comments and questions. Sometimes I'll be thinking or responding, and I won't always capture everything, but I'll do my best to capture highlights. And then between classes, you're going to receive a reminder on Slack or Basecamp. I'm going to hold Slack channel hours between 11 and 1 on Tuesday, about 4 days after we meet, so that you can post questions and I'll immediately respond. It doesn't mean that I won't respond at other hours. It just means it might take longer because I'll be teaching and doing other work. And then I'm going to post a food for thought questions throughout the week. And the food for thought questions are questions that I've either heard Gene Kim say, or Stafford, or any of the other people who are teaching, who co-authors, because I don't want to dismiss, there are actually other co-authors for the books. He just seems to be the most prolific spokesman for the books in question. I'll post questions that I know that he's asked, or things that might be associative as you read through the chapters through the week. So, and I would love to hear and see your efforts, and like, hey, I finished chapter 1, hey, I finished chapter 2, and any questions that might arise. The idea here is not just to read the Phoenix Project, it's to understand the dynamics of what's occurring in the project, so that you in turn may possibly apply them either to yourself individually, or to your group, or even potentially to your organization. That's the only intention, is to foster learning and to have a fun time while doing it. So just be aware that you will get some food for thought questions that will hopefully drive learning a little bit further. Let's talk about the charter really quick, and this is really important. Now, normally charters will evolve over time, so if you have suggestions for additions to the charter or change, that's fine. I just wanted to present a starter, if you will, of something to look at. So our charter basically is this. We're in a cyber club. You come here to learn. Hopefully you've also come here to have a little bit of fun, maybe be a little entertained through the process. So our focus here is that we're focused on fun and learning, right? So anything that kind of takes us off the DevOps topic, I won't necessarily, as moderator, like frown upon, but if it gets too far off topic or we're running out of time, I'll bring us back to the topic at hand and just say, hey, can we take that offline? Because I want to foster open, broad discussion, especially in the intention to kind of create a community in a sense. So, but I also realize that when we're vocally speaking, we're focused on a particular task. So let's focus on fun and learning during that time, all around DevOps. Number 2, and this is arguably the most important. I would have put it first, but bottom line is that without being overly sensitive, there is no allowance for disrespect. We all come from different backgrounds. We all have different viewpoints. We all have varying levels of gifts and skills and challenges. And so, we're not here to attack people or diminish them in any way. We're here to talk about ideas, possibilities, viewpoints, perspectives, experiences. But we're definitely not here to talk about people and like their specific individual challenges. So especially if you attack anybody, just so you know, like we'll get a warning and we don't allow that. So other than that, you've got tremendous flexibility around, talking about an idea or, criticizing it or critiquing it. The only thing we ask is that above all, just be respectful. I don't even need you to be kind. I just need you to be respectful. So that being said, when we do get to the more vocal portion of this, just be mindful. Just be mindful of interrupting, talking over people. Make sure that you're taking a breath and just listening and taking in. Sometimes we're so anxious to speak what's on our minds that we're not listening to what's coming in. And so I encourage you to just take a moment, allow the pace to be a little bit slower. I know we might all be tense in these pandemic times, which I hope everyone's staying healthy and sane. But just be mindful of that. Part of being respectful is not talking over people. So we want to give people a chance to finish their thoughts, even if you think you know what they're going to say. Third is that there's a no vote. So if I ask you to continue or do a question, or if anybody asks you to do working, you have the right to say no. I fully expect that I might say to someone, hey, it's a great question. Do you mind talking about it? And for whatever reason, whether you've got screaming kids in the background or you're just not comfortable, you might say, I'm going to pass. And guess what? That is your right. And I fully expect you to exercise that right, because I don't want anyone doing anything they don't want to do, especially for something as voluntary as the DevOps Cyber Club. So just know you get a no vote, and I expect you to use it to take care of yourself, but also know that you don't have to use it. You know, if you feel comfortable and I've asked you to do something or someone else has asked you to comment or whatever, you can say that as well, but just know you have the right to just stop at any point in time. Probably the last requirement, if you will, on our charter is that this is really kind of an anarchy, oligarchy, benevolent dictatorship. There's no democracy here, which doesn't mean that you won't get a chance to talk and have voice. That is the whole point of this whole thing, right? But just know that it's going to be a little chaotic, a little crazy, and then, you know, the group of us and I individually reserve the right to, you know, arbitrate when necessary. So we're going to try and achieve consensus, you know, especially if not necessarily towards harmony, because I don't mind people being, you know, in a space of disagreement, but just know that, you know, we're only going to exercise our power if we have to. Otherwise, you are all going to have weight and voice in what we talk about, where we go, what we say. So, and then these are just some requests. Be kind and powerful. So at a minimum, you have to be respectful, not negotiable. But I would like for you, if you can, be kind. So, you know, maybe not throw any cuss words around. That's disrespectful. But also don't be aggressive or whatnot. People can get hot. We're passionate. This is a topic that has, in a sense, lit the world on fire. So people are going to be passionate about it. Just make sure that your passion isn't overbearing. Have fun. So make sure, again, that we're having fun as we do this. Do the work. It's really for you. This is all voluntary. I'm here to have fun. I'm doing this, you know, on a voluntary basis. We're just here to but we want to do the work. We want to learn. We want to put some investment in. It's nothing's more disappointing to me than committing to something, and then maybe if I miss one, that's fine because life happens. But then when I miss two and I miss three, at that point, I just question my commitment to the whole thing. And last but not least, but arguably the most important, just stay connected. If you're like not learning anything, that's one thing. But if you're doing the work and you're feeling like you're not getting support or your question, just show up, get on the Slack channel, email me, you know, get on the Zoom channel, ask, talk to us. I will make every opportunity because my real goal here is to have everybody, you know, who wants to have a voice, have a voice. So stay connected with us if possible. That being said, I want you to know that in this forum, having done this before, most of you will probably not talk. So, and that's okay, because having done book clubs of this nature before, even in-person book clubs, a large portion of the people who attend, they don't say anything. And you know what? That's totally okay. If you're here to learn, absorb, take in, and you don't necessarily want to pop in, do questions, contribute, that's fine. I'm not going to hunt you down and seek you out. So it's okay. You can come here and hang out, absorb the knowledge, and take what you need, and then leave the rest on the floor. Totally great. All right. That was a lot of talking on my part. Does anyone have any questions they want to post in the chat? I see that Tanuja has a question. Tanuja, you're unmuted, so go right ahead. Just see a hand raised. Okay. Fair enough. You seem to still be on mute. Just FYI. No? Okay. Well, I left you allowed to talk, so please, you know, feel free, or just type it in chat if you're having challenges. Good. All right. Let's talk about what happens inside the chapter. So I'm going to switch views here for just a second. So bear with me just one moment. I'm actually going to pull the book up because I think that's useful to kind of like paw through it in a way, right, to see what's happening. Okay, so what happened in chapters 1 through 6? That's what we're going to cover next. So in chapters 1 through 6, first of all, acknowledging that this is a 35 chapter book with a prologue, and, you know, of course, there's resources and acknowledgments at the end, right? So, but no issue there. Just, you know, making sure that we're aware of the length of the book. So in 6 weeks, we're going to read about 6 chapters a week. Obviously, you know, that last week will probably be a little light because it's only 5 chapters, but that's what we're covering. We're covering six chapters a week. So here we are, and we've set the stage in the book with Parts Unlimited, where we've got a laundry list of people who are kind of our stage actors, right? We've Steve Masters, he's the acting CEO. Dick Landry, he's the CFO. Sarah, Maggie, Bill Palmer is our kind of protagonist and is our main star, if you will, right? And then we see that Bob Strauss, Eric Reed, Dancing Mailer, we see that that they're also listed, and they're on the board. Eric Reed is probably like the most important secondary character, if you will. But just to make sure, you've got Bill, who is the protagonist. You've got Wes, who handles operations. And he's under Bill. And you've got Chris, who's like a little bit of a peer of Bill because he's a VP of application development. And then you've got a CISO, and you've got Patty and Wes are still both under Bill. And you've got this whole hierarchy of folks. And actually, next week I have a hierarchy chart that I'm going to show you to see what their relationship is to each other. Because as the book goes on, understanding not only the hierarchy, the organization itself, but how they interact with each other is incredibly important. So I'll show you kind of an org chart, if you will, of what the Parts Unlimited business looks like. So most important thing to know right now, Steve Masters is the CEO, Bill Palmer is the protagonist. That's really the most important part to know. Now, as we get into the book, what we find out, bear with me just one second. As we get into the book, what you find out is that there's a press release, and it says in highlight that Steve Masters, who is actually the CEO, is actually stepping down as chairman. And it talks about how the stock price has tumbled pretty badly, actually, for Parts Unlimited. And they're struggling in this kind of new day and age to kind of make things happen to make ends meet. So, there's this gap, and it talks about the Phoenix project as being the savior project that's really going to change the nature of the company and really modernize it and take it to the next level. And so they then go on to say that despite Steve Masters, who is the current CEO, but now no longer a board chair, despite his challenges, he still actually only has a limited amount of time, about 6 months, before, if he doesn't do a miracle, doesn't pull something off, then something worse is going to happen. And they kind of imply that in this immediate press release. They imply, hey, guess what? There's going to be a problem if this guy doesn't pull something off. So immediately we go to chapter 1, and Bill Palmer answers his phone. So we get introduced immediately to our protagonist. And our protagonist basically delineates things that he's done, starts setting the stage, and he gets a call from human resources, which of course immediately you have some empathy for, not because human resources is bad, but like it's almost like a joke. Like when human resources calls you, it's usually a problem, right? And so he draws on a bunch of kind of, I wouldn't say like kind of common stories that we have in business about dealing with certain aspects of other aspects of the business, like human resources. And so, here we get introduced to Bill. Bill says, hey, the HR person says, hey, I need you to come in the office. I'm going to talk to you. I think it's good news. So there's a little bit of foreshadowing about like something's positive is happening. And then he walks in, and guess what happens? He finds out that his 2 bosses were just let go, right? And he makes a very clear statement here about, well, if someone else tells you that they've left, then they probably got fired, right? And it says it right here. But when somebody else tells you they've decided to quit, it was mandatory, right? So it goes on, and basically he talks with Steve. Steve and him find common rapport with their, interaction in the military. And Steve basically by the end convinces Bill that despite the fact that he doesn't want to do it, Bill needs to help him save the company. Calls on his sense of duty and says, hey, come and help save the company. So then he immediately walks out the door and says, because before he leaves, he says, look, we're having a problem. Our payroll system is on fire. And so I need you to connect with the CFO. And he gives them a set of priorities. He says, look, I need you to restore critical business operations and keep us out of the front page news. Oh, and by the way, make Phoenix happen, because Phoenix is our savior project. So automatically, Bill has gotten a promotion, and he's now been tasked to firefight. That's the first thing that's going to happen. Find out why this fire is happening, We've got an issue, but the stage is set at this point. We have a feel for how the leader of the company does business, and we now have his next stage down who handles operations. We now have some insight about him as well. Okay, so then we're on to chapter 2. So chapter 2, basically what happens is that Bill then goes and meets finance, right? So he goes and he talks to Dick. And Dick is the CFO. Dick Landry is the CFO of Parts Unlimited. So he goes in and has a conversation with Dick. Dick makes a bunch of comments about, like, hey, supposedly this guy is going to, save us and do this thing. He gets more information, and then he heads to the NOC, which is, their network operations center, which is kind of ground central for frontline issues for them, being, I would say, an older company. You don't find many companies now, at least in my limited experience, who have a NOC unless they're larger enterprise companies. So he basically gets more information, and then he immediately dives into the problem, meeting his new direct reports who were previously his peers, Wes and Patty. And Patty has like IT services, so she has support and a couple other pieces. And Wes has operations, including and mainly just for distributed system Windows. And I believe he has databases and network. So he has those components as well, which I believe includes the SAN, so storage area networking, because of its place in that whole piece. So they then realize that there's a SAN issue, right? And so there's an issue with their SAN network. Phoenix is choking, and then introduce Sarah, who's being talked about. Sarah is the SVP of retail operations, and Sarah is upset because Phoenix is not on task. So she doesn't care about the fire. Sarah is upset that their current Savior project is not moving forward. That's chapter 2. By the way, all of this is documented inside of a document that we're going to share with you about what happens, just so you're aware, just so you make sure. Like, well, how does Michael know? Like, is he just pulling this all off of his brain? No, I'm actually pulling it off of the sheet because I did actually re-review it. So, chapter 3. All right. So chapter 3 is happening, and so what happens is that now there's an investigation. So Bill is now going with Wes and Patty, and he's trying to figure out what's going on with the payroll issue. Everybody has a bunch of theories, but they're really assumptions because no one's even putting those theories out. There's no hypothesis that they're actually putting out to test, right? No one's testing their hypothesis. They're just throwing out a bunch of assumptions. And while I'm sure they're doing meaningful work, there's some flaws in chapter 3 that reveals around how some of the logic has been applied, right? People are using their past relationships with certain groups to dictate the logic that they're using to troubleshoot the problem. Pardon me just one second. All right, so chapter 3 continues because he meets Brett. Now, we meet Brett, and Brett is our superstar. He's the guy who nobody can move forward without. He's the guy who knows, who's been there a long time, who has all the experience, and is a genius at figuring out. He's the go-to guy that everybody goes to when they need to solve a problem or move things forward. So Brett thinks it's a change, and then they have some questions, and he realizes that security needs to get involved. And then guess what? They find out that it was a security change that broke the payroll issue. And, Bill starts asking the normal questions, which is, hey, what's going on here? How did this change get launched into production? I'm not clear how that has this happen. Patty, who's responsible for the change control process, starts to reveal, hey, the change control process is broken. Now, here's the interesting thing. First, there is basically a news memo that goes at the end of this. So it gets out, the flub basically hits the paper. So everybody now knows. But here's the other thing. You notice automatically that Bill's work-life balance is already broken, right? Because I think he gets home like at midnight. It's after midnight by the time he gets home. So he's been dealing with a crisis all day, which is totally fine. We have emergencies, that happens. But you already know that things have really shifted a lot for Bill, our hero, our protagonist, if you will, since he accepted this position. All right, so then chapter 4, what ends up happening is that immediately Bill is hit with way too much information via email, which I know that none of us can identify with, where we've gotten too many emails, right? He's got way too much information. And Bill basically says, and he does a genius thing. I don't know if anybody knows it. He delegates that down. He says, you know what? I have another person who can do this for me. She'll probably actually do it better, right? So let's delegate that down. So just send me the essential stuff. So he immediately prioritizes the overwhelming amount of information that he's getting and says, you know what? I need to make this information meaningful, because that's a normal state for us, is that we got too much information. So then, Bill delegates, and then politics ensue. So they end up going to a Phoenix status project, right? He's walking into building 9. And of course, by the way, he notes that the marketing building is really nice compared to where they're at, right? And he says, he meets this lady named Kirsten who heads the project management for the Phoenix project, and says, look, here's the challenge. We've gone to yellow to red about 4 weeks ago, and then immediately there's tons of politics. And I think if I remember correctly, he even states in here, you don't rise to a certain level inside the Marines without being able to deal with politics. And he basically, him and Sarah kind of square off, and they have very different agendas. And I wouldn't say it's necessarily adversarial, but like, notice this statement here. Interesting, he says to Sarah. You tell me which is more important, getting our factory employees paid or getting the Phoenix tasks done. Steve told me to resolve the payroll failure. How would you have prioritized this differently than Steve? So immediately, you're like, in one bold stroke, because he's a tech guy, in the story, but apparently he's like, well, how do you want me to approach this? Because Steve told me to do this, and now you're telling me to do this. I mentioned that because that could be a key way to approach some of these priority conflicts that you run into, in your own individual or place of work, right? Which I found interesting. Now, of course, Sarah kind of turns it around because her character is more skilled at this than Bill is, and so she kind of turns it around a little bit. And unfortunately, Steve agrees with we need to deal with the payroll failure, but he also agrees that we need to get Phoenix launched, because remember, Steve just lost his board chair, and so his priority is to get Parts Unlimited to a place where it's stable, and they all believe, not know, they don't have any metrics. They all believe that Phoenix is going to take Parts Unlimited to the next level. So, and by the way, it's worth mentioning that Bill is overrun. So, like, they really don't acknowledge the sanity of his statements. And Brent is revealed. Brent is revealed basically as a constraint. So Brent is the guy who is like super smart and does everything. Like, he's the central, like, you have to go to in order to get things done. Sorry if I said Brett earlier, but it's Brent. And Brent is revealed again as a constraint. Like, no work seems to be able to get done without him. And then coup de grace, Bill's laptop is bricked by a security patch, which is excellent. And then Bill sends out a thing saying, look, I need to send out a message to everybody letting them know that change control is not optional. We have to know what changes are being made in the environment, because we can't fix problems without knowing that. And Wes comes to him and challenges him and says, guess what? We tried this before and it didn't work. Now, how often have you heard that in your own workplaces where it's, we tried Agile before and it didn't work. We tried DevOps before and it didn't work. We tried automation before, it didn't work. We did cloud before and it didn't work. Just know that, like, this is presented here because they've done it before and they didn't get the results they were looking for. And the last statement in chapter 4 is very telling. What will it take for us all to get along? A great way to end the chapter, by the way, because he's starting to hit already on the cultural challenges that he's seeing, which is that these people don't respect each other. It's not even that they don't like each other. That's a different thing, right? That doesn't really matter in a professional setting so much, but even the way they interact with each other is disrespectful, right? And so how do they come to common ground to be able to understand that they're all in the same team, and maybe even there's some affinity built, so maybe they do get to liking each other and they like the support and they like what their mission and they like the goal and the vision. So it's interesting that Bill raises this as the ending question. Stick with me, I'm not going to talk for much longer. So he wakes up with a jolt, right? He basically, gets called in because the audit that is also now a third problem pending. So we've got the payroll issue, which kind of gets resolved, right? We've got the Phoenix project that gets resolved. And then we have a bevy of other problems, including an auditor audit, which will actually land people in jail if they violate, according to the CISO, right? And so, which by the way, that gets attended to later. It's very, very interesting how that gets attended to in later portions of the book. But you already know, first of all, his work-life balance is off, and so he's got a little conflict with his wife. Security is overloading everything with tons of requests for deficiencies. Like here they have, it says, we found 952 IT general control deficiencies. Again, overwhelming amount of work. So he's starting to track the flow of work in the system. Now, additionally, what ends up happening is that Brent comes up as a choke point again. Like he comes up as a choke point, and they can't seem to get knowledge out of Brent because even in the interview process where he's interviewing people, he gets called to fires. And so Bill starts asking the question, how do we protect our resources? How are our people being utilized? What are our people and their work centers? What are they doing? What is the flow of work? What work is coming in to operations? Like, how do we track that? And basically he ends saying, look, you know what we need? We need data. I need, like, basically, like Patty says it here, but you need a list of organizational commitments for our key resources with a one-liner on what they're working on and how long it's going to take. Yes, exactly. And he says, look, bonus points if you and Wes can determine which resources, meaning people, right, are and work centers, right, are overutilized and how many new people we actually need. So now we're starting to assess, right, how the system is, where it's being constrained at, and how badly is it being constrained? What have we said yes to? What work have we accepted? And then last chapter, first we come in, it's another one of the Phoenix status meetings, and guess what? The developers are overloaded. And the developers are overloaded, and operations is overloaded, and right, everybody's overloaded. And the project list, they find out from Patty, is massive. And that project list is way more than they're going to be able to handle with their current system of constraints. And the acceptance process, they find out for new projects, is ad hoc. Whoever screams the loudest gets priority on their project, and they're accepting work. They're just saying yes to work, and they have no gatekeepers or methodologies. And they have their second change control meeting. And what's interesting is there's some resistance to the outcome of that second change control meeting, but it's quickly overcome. But the one thing they find out, and I'm going to skip to it here, is that they have, like, we're looking at 400 changes being made just in the next week, which is way more than they can handle given their current constraints and, you know, automate manual versus automation, like the process. So Bill, in a stroke of genius, doesn't block any of those changes. Anything that's scheduled between now and Monday, when they discover this, they let go. But after that, they're going to start doing something to block the changes. So they've created awareness first before they actually do anything, and because they want to analyze the data and think about it. And so that's the first 6 chapters. So, all right, so I just talked. We got about 17 minutes left, but obviously we spent some time on logistics. And if you haven't read it, that's fine. We'll you know, any chapter from any question can be asked in any session. So don't feel like you've got to be constrained to the chapters at hand. But I want to open it up. If you're interested in typing a question, or you want to open it up to the floor and have some people talk about it, please, by all means. Now we're moving into the period where I'd love for you to ask some questions, throw some stuff out there. I do have some questions that I can throw out there, but I'm curious, like, if you've read the book, or even if this is the first time you've even heard anybody talk about it, was there anything that stood out or anything of interest that you wanted to ask a question about related to these 6 chapters? We'll give a few minutes. So from quiet for a second, not broken, just pausing. So Denis, I saw your first question. And hold on just one second. Denis, I'm gonna unmute you. If you decide you want to unmute and talk, you can. So by all means, if you want to carry your comment.
Sure. Yeah, my observation every time I read this book, this is my second time through it, is that, oh my God, I am so happy I do not work for Parts Unlimited, because it's like the epitome of all the things you should not do. The thing I notice most is that these teams are so siloed, they don't talk to one another. They are all constantly fighting fires. Their priorities are constantly shifting. there's no structure. They have no master plan.
They have no master plan. There's no alignment, right? It's not.
Yeah.
There's not clear that there's no alignment between the teams, right? Because even if they had alignment, even if they didn't have a plan, it would be loose. It would be, but they probably would be in lockstep, right? They'd be talking to each other, because Bill notes earlier on in the book that his mid-range systems team, which includes, I'm assuming includes like mainframes and big iron and older boxes, whenever they made a change, they would all go talk to everybody else on the team. So they didn't really have a documented process, but they had a process. They would go talk to everybody on the team and bent over backwards to make sure they weren't stepping on each other's feet.
Right.
But you're right. These people aren't talking to each other. Not in a way that's meaningful. It is also worth mentioning that I'm always fascinated, because I've worked, I'm not super proud of this, but I've worked for about 20 companies over the last 25 years. I can't tell you how many companies I've walked in and they look exactly like this. I mean, not exaggeration. Environment's unstable, people aren't talking, they're falling over. Operations is underwater, or development's underwater and operations underwater. It's shocking how close this matches a number of companies that I've worked for. The other thing I will mention is that, without giving anything away, because I don't want to violate any trust, is that almost 100% of those companies that looked like this, they're out of business. So, there's that. But I will also mention, I've worked for billion-dollar Fortune 100 companies that look exactly like this, and I have no idea how they've survived, frankly. Just at least the group that I was dealing with. Kim, I unmuted you as well if you want to talk, but you asked an interesting question. I don't know if you want to give voice to it. So Kim asked, she said, how did they manage to operate that way for so long? Which is an excellent question. And, I think if someone had the answer to that, they would have the catalyst for how to create change in an organization like that. Is that the truth of the matter is that every company that I've encountered that I've either done DevOps transformations with from a hands-on perspective, either has a leader or even has a worker bee, they all eventually hit some kind of critical mass. And sometimes that's critical mass that leads to failure. Sometimes the company is so large, they actually can't fail because they've just got a huge amount of runway, revenue, operating capital, their sales cycle is so strong that like they actually have the opportunity to change, and sometimes they just limp along. I know this is going to sound like an exaggeration. I've walked into 50,000 person companies, and this particular division that I would walk into doesn't have a process for change control, doesn't have a process for creating architectures, creating systems, or creating code. So it's kind of fascinating. Let's see. Denise, you had another one which stands out for me is how siloed they are. Yeah, any other comments around that?
Not really. I mean, I think one thing that I find a little fascinating is obviously they're struggling at Parts Unlimited with the fact that they don't really have effective change control. But, my current employer, it feels like we've gone on the other deep end where we have a very rigid change control process to the point where it kind of gets in the way a lot. And then when I followed up, and I'm spoiler alert, looking at the Unicorn project, they seem to not want change management at all because they want to be able to continually deploy.
Right.
So I'm struggling a little bit with, organizationally, how do we make it work? I've lived in the wild, wild west of no change control, and clearly that is not something I want to go back to. How do we make it so that it works for everybody?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fine balance, right? Because you don't want to introduce so much control that the system chokes, but at the same time, you do need at least enough control, and I'm going to use that loosely because that could be oversight, that could be metrics, that could be accountability, right? But you need enough control so that the system remains stable, because if there's no guardrails, the system becomes unstable, right?
Right.
So, yeah. So just say from my own personal experience, and I would love to hear others. And by the way, everybody who's typed a question for the most part or a response, I have unmuted. So if you like typed a question or you've made a comment, I've unmuted so you're allowed to talk. You'll see them pop up on the thing. So just know. And if you want to raise your hand, I'll be glad to unmute you at any time if you want to make a comment. I just want to en masse unmute people in case people have stuff going on in the background. I know we've all got our kids probably. So the thing that's interesting about that is that I've been in environments that have been draconian, like you've described, where it's really heavy on the change control process. People are mad, they have to fill up unnecessary fields. What that happens is that it's a little bit like when operations or security gets a little heavy on that themselves. People then try to cheat, right? They try to bypass change control process. They avoid the process altogether. They make secret changes. And then, of course, if operations and security have tight control over the infrastructure, that's not possible. So people just get mad. And productivity goes down as a result. I've also been on the other side of things where I came in and there's no change control process and there's way too many changes. So I guess the bottom line is that for a lot of the environments that I'm seeing now, what's happening is that people are putting automated systems in place that enforce the constraints that they want for changes. Like, for example, CI/CD, which of course is a huge battle cry and considered to be a huge part of both a process and a technological delivery mechanism for DevOps. Continuous integration, continuous delivery, continuous deployment these create these automated systems where developers can push code gets tested, vetted, security complied. Operations and security might put their agents on it, and then it goes out into production if someone approves it, right? That's continuous delivery, just the packaging. Continuous deployment is when it just automatically goes out into production. If you're using microservices with small amounts of change, or even a monolith that just has a small amount of changes to it, and your test coverage is awesome, and your security processes and operations has got their stuff together around metrics and deployment and auto-scaling infrastructure, all that works. But you obviously just heard the mouthful that I gave, which is that getting to that actually does require some initial upfront investment. And so you're right, it's this juggling point between, okay, how much control do I exert to not kill the business, and if I let it go too far, it's anarchical, and we don't want that. So the bottom line is it's like the consultant's answer, it depends. But generally, if the technology is there to support the constraints, guardrails, and compliance, you get to go faster with less oversight. If you're using microservices versus monoliths, my experience, you tend to get to go a little faster because that team is focused on one product, one microservice, one thing, and on that entire ecosystem. And as long as they don't compromise their contracts with other microservices, they tend to go a little bit faster. But it all actually goes down to size. The smaller the code base and the more focused the team, the less and the more rigorous they are around their contractual interfaces like APIs, the less you have to do change control on them because they're going to be pretty accountable. So that's my experience. Anybody else have a comment or anything to add to that?
Do the teams that do the continuous delivery or continuous integration, do they automate it so that there is a record in the change control system?
And many times, yes. Yeah, okay. You have to. Because you have to be able to track and see like when things were built, because the only reason we keep logs and monitoring is when things go wrong, right? Sorry, I kind of cut you off. Did you have more to add to that?
Nope, that's it.
Yeah, so yes, 100%. And just to say this, really good teams that are a little bit more, I wouldn't say mature, but more capable in their CI/CD process, make it so that everyone can see every run of the CI/CD process. So you get those scorecards where it's like green versus red versus yellow, so that everybody can see exactly how that product is doing and how it ran. And so good CI/CD teams make that highly visible, and then you can usually click on it using whatever, like Grafana, whatever you're using, Jenkins, GitLabs, whatever, and you can click on it and you can actually see the details about if it failed or if it was yellow, like why did it turn cautionary and why did it fail. So good teams make that kind of work super visible. Okay. Let's see. Kim, let's see. Communication is always a challenge, but to that extent seems unrealistic. So Kim, if you don't mind, what did you mean by communications always to that extent was unrealistic? Meaning in the negative or in the positive? In the negative. Yeah, and I used to believe that, but I would say over the last 8 years in particular, both with large enterprises and with startups, it's that bad. I mean, it's shocking. And when I first read this book when it came out in like 2013, if I remember correctly, because I'm probably on my seventh or eighth reading. This will probably like be somewhere like number eight. um, I was shocked at how they talk to each other. But then 2014, 2015, 2016, after watching a number of companies go under, and you're watching those interactions and starting to pay attention more, because I was a hardcore engineer and then I became a DevOps person, which meant I started looking more at the cultural pieces than I did at the technology pieces, because I already had the technology pieces from my viewpoint down. It's shocking. Like, this is not abnormal. This is not abnormal behavior. This is not abnormal talk. This is not abnormal siloing. I mean, I was working for a company at one point that did not deliver a single piece of working software in 18 months. I would have never thought in my entire career that any company, whether they were a startup, a medium-sized company, or an enterprise, could get away with not delivering software for 18 months. I mean, and just to be clear, there were 7,000 people in this company. So, you know, I don't know. Is it unrealistic in the negative? I don't know. I think we can push that pretty far. Any other comments or anything about that? Yeah. Sarosh, let's see, or Sarosh, sorry, I'm not sure how to pronounce it. I think
It's
I
Roche,
unmuted
you
you.
got it
Did you?
right.
Oh, good, Sarosh. Hi. Did you want to talk more about your perspective on that?
Sure. I mean, it's such a powerful story, though, this book. I mean, there's a reason gives us all such joy to read it. The first instinct I had when we kind of started reviewing the first couple chapters was, how would any of these teams even know there was a SAN issue? Like, after working for a large organization for so many years, you just realize that there's so many managers, so many leads, so many engineers you got to go through before you have some consensus on what is even going on. Um, and sort of related to that, and the previous discussion, we're talking about communication in general. Even when we try and fix these things, and for the past few years, we've really been trying to adopt, some good practices, lining up, development and operations. Eventually, security's been at the table for a lot of discussions, right from, design right into implementation and auditing. And then now we're at the stage where, like, oh gosh, like, these architectural sort of conversations, they need to be part of it too. So it's, you can slowly see that, naturally evolve from dev, ops, sec, arc, the whole bit.
Right.
And as do your workflow mapping, and your change control kind of is adopted a little bit more without hesitation. Users and developers, everyone's kind of like innately just trained to, like, log a ticket. um, you have this sort of baseline of work getting done, but then what now seems to happen is you have more and more projects, because people get excited, like, hey, look, this is our potential, we could do more, and more projects get thrown into the list. So, like, I just feel like all of this happens in cycles. It's not like people haven't tried to improve these things before DevOps was a term, right?
Agreed.
So like, so I always have this anxiety and fear, like, oh man, like those 400 projects on the go in the book, that's nothing. and
Right.
and maybe I think along these lines that, hey, this is the norm, and this always happens, and we just need some kind of strategic alignment, and maybe things will work out. But maybe I'm thinking these ways because it's a large organization that I represent, and we do have large departments of engineers and project managers and all these other different types of roles. I honestly don't know what it's like for some smaller firms out there. Maybe they're a bit more agile, um, but then just makes me have even more questions.
Yeah, absolutely. And just so you know, my latest stint was actually the global architect for containers and cloud for Honeywell International.
Oh,
So,
very cool.
110 10,000 plus people even after the residential stuff split. So yeah, when I'm talking about enterprises, that's like EDS, HP, like those are the guys I'm familiar with. So you're right. I mean, you're right to be concerned, because at scale, problems and cracks are far more revealed, and that's true in systems. It's true in people. We get stressed, you get to see all our flaws, right? When we're not stressed, right? And so 400 projects, that's probably pretty top, pretty small. So unfortunately, I want to talk more about that, but it's 1 o'clock. And I want to be respectful of time. So I love that you shared your perspective. That's great. So Greg Wagner wanted to share one comment before we close. What I'm going to do is I'm going to follow up with some emails. It's so great that you guys participated. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you particularly for the people who posted questions and talked, but I'm all glad that you're here. We're going to have more time for discussion next time, because there's not going to be as many logistics. So I hope you'll join us a week from tomorrow for our next session, but I'm going to let Greg talk for a second and see what he has to say and share with us. Greg, where are you? There you are. Greg, go for it.
Okay, everybody can hear me?
You're a little broken on my end, but I hope everybody else can hear you.
Okay, perfect. I'm getting a message that says my internet connection is unstable.
Yes.
So anyway, I just basically wanted to thank everybody for joining us in this book club. We thought it was a great idea at the current time of the world, so to speak. So thank you all for joining. We're going to send out an eval for the first session. It doesn't necessarily apply to a program like this. It's more for an instructor-led class, but feedbacks, comments, suggestions would really be appreciated if you could take the time to do that, because we're doing this for you folks, and so we want to make sure we're hitting the target, and taking the time, 5 minutes to fill out the evaluation to make it better going forward would certainly be appreciated. And that's it for me.
Awesome. Okay. Well, again, thank you, everyone. I feel like we got kind of a little bit cut off. Next time, we're going to have a lot more space and time. Please continue your connections into Slack and into Basecamp. And if you have any difficulty at all, email me, michael.forrester@webagesolutions.com. Catch me on LinkedIn, and I completely look forward to covering chapters 7 through 13 with you next time. Thank you so much for attending. I really appreciate it.